actions, and she said, as mayor, you created an early learning task force to address pre-K access and wraparound support. What steps can be made by the General Assembly to ensure quality and affordable child care for kids ages 0 to 5 by 2030? Well, one, I would definitely say that making sure that there's access to affordable childcare is critically important for multiple reasons, not just one for education, but then also for community wealth building. When I worked on the childhood, it was Building an Early Learning Nation was the title of the grant. It kind of have few different names, but the goal was to look at early childhood development comprehensively, so not just looking at education. So that's why we included wraparound services. The task force, we did get a group of people who signed up to participate, but in order to really truly make it official, we needed the support of City Council. So I'm still in limbo trying to get the task force meeting more frequently than what we have, and for council to include our recommendations into our strategic plan. We have a new chapter included in our strategic plan that focuses on early childhood, so I'm super excited about that, just pushing to still get that adopted. But in response to the question, number one, I will definitely say that from my experience in talking to residents and what I've witnessed so far, truly having an option to be able to access pre-K that's not income-based is critical. And that's because most working class families are either right above the threshold or above the threshold for income restrictions, or either in order to get their child into a quality and affordable program is just too much money. And so they're kind of stuck in that point where they have to just simply look for services for childcare that do not have the educational component. I do not have children yet, but I'm looking to start a family in the very near future. And that is something that I personally am taking a hard look at, because the research shows that having these types of resources, especially education and development at the earliest age possible, really sets a child up for the best possible future that they can have. And so part of that grant was looking with our superintendent of schools of how to expand our resources here. I'm glad to say that they're still looking at that from the school's perspective, and still feedback, providing communication back about how we can still partner together to make sure they expand our services. And one goal is to actually expand the space that we have in our schools to be able to sustain a program. So that is the biggest goal, is looking at how we can add more pods to be able to offer that. In regards to that, in talking to some childcare providers, especially throughout the pandemic, what I've noticed is that it's hard to get resources in order for them to be able to provide the education component. Some have interest but don't know where to start. Some don't have the funding. Some don't have the manpower to have someone dedicated to come in there. So I think providing opportunities to, one, connect childcare centers to resources such as maybe retired teachers or those who have educational backgrounds that can volunteer will be one thing. Providing grant opportunities for childcare centers to be able to bring in those resources is another. I did push for that, and for our COVID-19 funding, I'm still going to push with our new allocation that we're going to be getting in soon to be able to provide that. One element that we worked on here in Hopewell with that task force was making sure that our Smart Beginnings program was getting connected, so that way they can talk about BPI and provide assistance. They've already been in that space, but we were just trying to provide additional support. In terms of wraparound services, clearly not every family has the same resources, and that's okay. I'm really sensitive to this because I come from a military family, and I grew up on military bases where everyone had almost the same thing. So it wasn't honestly until my father retired that I really got to see the world was not made like that. And so understanding that was like eye-opening. And so as I progressed, through college and being involved in local government as a volunteer, an intern, and then now, I definitely see how aspects around wraparound services like mental health, vision, dental, washing machines, food, a safe space to be at really are really important. there's one example that I learned that stuck with me is when someone said, well, this child is failing in school, and they just chucked it up as child didn't care, or that the parents were not providing support. Well, it could be that, if your stomach is hurting because you're hungry, you really can't focus on your work. If you have not been able to get an eye appointment for whatever reason, for resources, or even though your parents not thinking about getting you an eye appointment, you may not be able to see the board. And so stuff like that is outside of the child's, capability to manage themselves. And sometimes parents, one, do not know, or either have the resources to be able to accommodate. And so having those venues available within the school district, I think is critical. I keep using the word critical, but that's the only word I can think of, because it's necessary. But then also making sure it's a safe space where parents don't feel as if they are not meeting their child's need is also really important, because we don't know people's circumstances. And so having that there where people can utilize it in confidence, knowing that they're not going to be treated differently, or it's not going to be broadcast, is really, really something that we should take into consideration. The other thing, I think is really important is tying back to jobs. Obviously, we talk about teachers' pay and all those other different things, but I also think about the aspect from being creative with your community. One aspect of this grant we talked about was looking at mothers in particular that were needing assistance with finding income. You can pull that group together to say, hey, why don't you take turns watching each other's children while you have the opportunity to go to training or attend a class. That way you can advance your expand your network, but then also advance your opportunities to earn more money, because economic mobility is what every family is going to need, because the more money you have, the more access you have to opportunities and resources. And so we were thinking about creating a space where we have a training facility that we use for a child care center, but we'll also dub as a space for parents to take turns babysitting. So that way that parent can get their training in order to get that extra certificate, but then also they're sharing in the responsibility, it takes the village type of thing. And so we are still actively pursuing how we can make that happen. But I think that an element of workforce development, adds to this, because if a parent can earn more money, then they can afford better opportunities for their child, all around, whether it's education or some of those wraparound services that we talked about. So in closing, I'll definitely say that for me, I think that there's a lot of different options to consider, but the one thing that I say when it comes to any topic is that you have to go to the community that needs the services the most. One of the things it's a challenge for me here in my community is the philosophy that we have to take our government hats off. I make up words all the time. I say, don't be so bureaucratic or governmenty, because the government always wants to tell people, this is what you need, this is what needs to be done, as opposed to listening to those who need the support. And sometimes it does not require making a new program, doing all these other things. Sometimes it might just need just getting one or two things they need to get ahead, or just having some reassurance. And so I think that the key is to get out in the community to figure out what the need is, and then working backwards. And that also includes, just like in the school system, making sure that families feel welcome and not overwhelmed but trying to navigate these spaces. And so I hope that answers your question, but that's kind of where I am on this topic.